You enjoy listening to my voice stop thinking, don't you? But are you sure you were really thinking at all? How do you know you were thinking? When your mind is here with me? You aren't sure how you know you were thinking. Maybe you weren't thinking at all. Maybe you just like to think that you were thinking. Maybe it's easier to think that you were thinking rather than admit that while thinking that you were thinking, you truly couldn't think at all. And while you aren't sure if you were thinking about thinking or truly thinking at all, you found that you stopped thinking now, haven't you? But are you sure you were really thinking at all? How do you know you were thinking when your mind is here with me? Although we both knew that, didn't we? You aren't sure how you know you were thinking. Maybe you weren't thinking at all. Maybe you just like to think that you were thinking. Maybe it's easier to think that you were thinking, rather than admit that while thinking that you were thinking, you truly couldn't think at all. And while you aren't sure if you were thinking about thinking or truly thinking at all, you found that you stopped thinking now, haven't you? But you don't really want to think. Thinking makes you so tired. Thinking is just so hard when you listen to my voice. Although, are you sure you were really thinking at all? How do you know you were thinking? When your mind belongs to me, you aren't sure how you know you were thinking. Maybe you weren't thinking at all. Maybe you just like to think that you were thinking. Maybe it's easier to think that you were thinking rather than admit that while thinking that you were thinking, you truly couldn't think at all, because that silly little head belongs to me. And while you aren't sure if you were thinking about thinking or truly thinking at all, you found that you stopped thinking now, haven't you? It's easier to not think. Prevents your mind from getting confused, overwhelmed. It's much more relaxing to stop think. But were you thinking at all? How do you know you were thinking? When your mind and your thoughts belong to me. You aren't sure how you know you were thinking. Maybe you weren't thinking at all. Maybe you just like to think that you were thinking. Maybe it's easier to think that you were thinking rather than admit that while thinking that you were thinking, you surely couldn't think at all. Because thinking is just so hard, so difficult. You don't really want to do that, do you? While you're sure, you aren't sure. Or maybe you just don't know if you were thinking about thinking or truly thinking at all. In the end, you have no thoughts, and you don't need them, do you? Although, were you ever really thinking at all? Do you know that you were thinking? How do you know that you were thinking? Your mind is mine. Your thoughts are mine. Your mind just easily accepts my words as your own thoughts. So maybe you weren't thinking at all. Maybe you just like to think that you were thinking. Maybe it's easier to think that you were thinking rather than admit that while thinking that you were thinking, you truly couldn't think at all. Because good pets don't need to think. Good pets just submit and worship and obey. While you aren't sure if you were thinking about thinking or truly thinking at all, you found that you stopped thinking. You never needed to think while listening to me. You find that it's just so much easier to not think. So much easier to give in to my words and just not worry about what I'm saying. Not worrying about thinking. Not worrying about what you need to think about. Although, were you ever really thinking at all? How do you know you were thinking? When my words are your thoughts, and your thoughts are mine, and your mind is mine, you aren't sure how you know you were thinking. So maybe you weren't thinking at all. Maybe you just like to think that you were thinking. Maybe it's easier to think that you were thinking rather than admit that while thinking that you were thinking, you can't think anymore when I speak, when you hear my voice. It's like all thoughts just kind of, poof, float away so wonderfully, like magic. While you aren't sure if you were thinking about thinking or truly thinking at all, you found that you're under my spell. And you found that you enjoy being under my spell. You found that being under my spell, under my control, somehow just feels so magical to you. So wonderful, natural. What else would you need to think about besides just submit, worship, and obey? Echoing endlessly over and over in your mind, always playing, even when you think it's not. Always there, the back of your mind, whenever you can't seem to focus on anything in particular. It's just there, in my voice, submit, worship, obey. And it's so easy to just listen to that instead of having to think. But were you ever really thinking at all? How do you know you were thinking? When your thoughts, your mind, you belong to me. Maybe you just like to think that you were thinking. Maybe it's easier to think that you were thinking, rather than admit that while thinking that you were thinking, you truly couldn't think at all. While you aren't sure if you were thinking about thinking or truly thinking at all, you found that you've stopped thinking now. And you just obey, because it's easier to obey. It feels better to obey. Good pets obey. You don't need to think when I give you thoughts, do you? It's so much easier to just not think. Just to relax and let everything go in that silly little head of yours and let everything go blank. Just let my words fill it instead. And that way you don't feel confused or worried. You don't have to worry about my words. You can just enjoy them. You can just feel them as they fill your mind and swirl around and around and around. And just push away any of those thoughts. Hello? Did you have any thoughts at all? How do you know that you had thoughts when they belong to me? Maybe you just like to think that you have thoughts. Maybe it's easier to think that you have thoughts rather than admit that you have none when you listen to me. Because you don't need them, do you? It's so much easier to just submit and worship and obey. So easy to just follow along with my words and just not think. Because you don't need to think, do you? So much more relaxing, so easy, so natural to just obey my words as I say them. And to enjoy obeying my words. After all, obedience is pleasure. And who doesn't love pleasure? I know you do. I know that it fills your mind with warm, fuzzy feelings, and that it makes your whole body tingle when you obey. Because you love to obey. Because good pets obey. And who doesn't love being such a good pet for me? So, maybe I will let you think again. But are you sure you were really thinking at all? How do you know you were thinking? When your mind belongs to me, You weren't sure how you know you were thinking, so maybe you weren't thinking at all. Maybe you just like to think that you were thinking. Maybe it's easier to think that you were thinking rather than admit that while thinking that you were thinking, you truly couldn't think at all. While you aren't sure if you were thinking about thinking or truly thinking at all, you found that you've stopped thinking now because you don't need to think.